the clarity of finding and buying the right deal just by being able to see a property and immediately know you can make more than your entire annual salary if you just went, sign a piece of paper and pay the deposit. I could slog it off for an entire year, miserable, or I could literally just buy 2 of these, which would take me a couple of weeks, and make that much money. That reinforced further the clarity of how I was going to get to my goal. Buy one, pull equity, buy another, pull equity, buy another, pull equity. The end was clear. And then that just kept me driving to do all these shitty jobs, to do the transport. I didn't even care about the salary. I was making so much more money just by getting the right deal. For most people, they tend to get tripped up on the stuff that used to trip me up, which was like the maintenance and the tenancy issues and, again, all the noise around you. You're going the wrong strategy. Why don't you buy something in the North Shore or something in the city instead? But all the people that were giving advice wasn't where I wanted to be.
Mate, thanks for joining. We'll get straight into this because I'm really excited. I want to get into it by framing it up. We're huge in our business, in our podcast land and everything that we do, that we don't like talking so much about what. We like to talk a lot about why. So to get inside the psyche of you, not what you do. We know you're a buyer's agent. We know you've got so many accolades. We know that you're buyer's agent of the year. So you come highly, highly, highly credentialed. But what I'm more interested in today is understanding you, understanding your psyche, your mental model, the way you think about property. Get inside there like I'm living inside of you right now, Mr. Simon Loo, so that the listeners and the viewers can go, wow, that's how I should be thinking. That's how I should be orchestrating my life, my affairs, and my doings so that I can have the level of success and story that you've had. So I want to stay there today if we can.
Yeah, sure. It's fucked up in there, man. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, we'll talk about let's start there. That's probably a good place to start. This is actually a therapy session.
Well, Hong said that. He said that these people are possessed by something. These successful high performers are possessed by something. Comes from somewhere deeper than just being successful. So,
like, I failed high school twice, actually. The first time was in high school, and you know, I was just a rat, unmotivated. I was playing games and shit all day, and it was just really like had no direction, right? And during the final exam, back then it was called the HSC. I don't think it's called HSC anymore.
Yeah, I'm old as well, mate.
yeah, we're here. It was HSC for us too.
At the English exam, you had to choose which question to answer, write a massive essay on, based on what book you read.
Yes.
Right? And since I didn't read the book, I chose the wrong question. And I managed to write like a 3-page, 1,000-word, 1,500-word essay, like just bullshit my way through. And then I ended up getting like 50 UAI or something. Like back then it was called UAI, like the score. And then that didn't enable me to go to any university except for Orange, right? There was a University of Western Sydney campus in Orange. And then at the time I was living at home, and my mum gave me an ultimatum. She's like, if you want to stay in this house, you either go to Orange, which meant I wouldn't be staying in the house, or you go do it again. You go do HSC again, right? And then back then, like, again, no direction. I'm not going to go to Orange. For what?
Rural properties out
Yeah,
there.
100%.
We know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I'm not
What am I gonna be,
investigating
like
an orange.
farmer or something? No way. So I did it again in TAFE, right? I went to Hornsby TAFE and I did it. The second year, I think I got 57 UAI. So I improved by 7.
Nice. Progress.
Progress, yeah.
You're still not at orange though.
No, not at Orange. Yeah, and then afterwards, I was like, all right, cool. I think my parents at that point recognized that I was just not good at study, right? Just leave it, right? It's done. So she's like, look, you can go be a trade, be a Sparky or something, right? And then I'm like, look at these hands. Like,
I didn't say yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, it's like the softest, babyest hands. Nah, and then I was like, no, I'm not doing that. So, you're going to I was kind of thinking, okay, what can I actually do, right? And then when you got no credentials, the only thing you can do is sales, like if you want to wear a suit, right? Or if you want to go to an office. So I did that. The very first sales job I got was in recruitment, which is where most sales careers begin. It was with a company where they didn't really offer much training, so you're kind of just thrown in the deep ends, and you like get like kind of just the stereotypical get on the phone, right? So I was just getting on the phone, didn't know what I was doing. I was actually very much an introvert back then, right? I was very shy. Kind of just failed my way to the point where I just ended up getting some kind of hang of it, right? And it's interesting because like failing at everything that you do gives you two things. Number one, a lot of drive and passion and motivation to go, okay, cool. Well, I need to fucking succeed now. I need to do this properly. But it also at that point started teaching me how much I hate my life. Right? Seriously. Because if every day you wake up, you put on your shitty suit, you catch a train to go to work, only to suck at it, and you kind of self-motivate yourself. How am I going to get out of this? You develop like a hatred for that process, that 9 to 5, right? So that kind of started that or ignited that sort of pathway for me to start thinking, okay, maybe there's another way. So that's when I started looking at different investment strategies and things like that. But properties came quite naturally because I had some interest at that point, about houses in general, but they were mostly like, there's mansions and like, really baller type houses. And then that became kind of like another goal, I guess, in my mental, what do you call it, vision board. But it really was born purely, how do I get out of this 9 to 5, right? So anyway,
How old were you at this point?
I think it was like 20, it's got to be early 20s, 20, maybe 22 or something like that. At that point, I started reading 2 books. One was a book from Steve McKnight, which talked about 0 to 130 properties in 4 years or whatever. And the other book was from a guy called Michael Yardney, who talked about negative gearing and, buying fancy houses and all this kind of stuff. And I thought to myself, hopefully no Michael Yardney fans here, but this doesn't make sense, right? Like, I was earning probably about 100 grand a year, right, back then, including commissions, right? So I wasn't like earning nothing. I was doing okay in my sales job. And I'm like, how many, like, if my goal was to retire and get out of this life, how am I going to make enough money buying 2 of these blue chip, properties that's going to hemorrhage my entire paycheck, leave me with $200-300 a week to live off, just sitting there and hoping and praying that it's going to go up in value to make it all worthwhile. Like, that's not a strategy. Whereas this guy, he was really focused on a lot of regional areas at the time. And I knew even back then, I knew that wasn't a good thing to do. But I kind of still followed his sort of philosophy of, okay, we need rental yield because, even if it just takes a year or 2 years for that house to go from back then 300,000 to 600,000, you still need to wait it out, right? So I kind of erred towards that strategy. Initially, I was really focused on cash flow with the properties that I bought, because I just didn't want any. I had like a phobia that houses were going to cost me lots of money. You know what I mean? But anyway, I kind of went down this path, and then I kind of did a lot of research myself. Every single weekend I would go and do Saturday opens. I'd shortlist like a dozen or 15 odd properties and just go by myself to check houses out. And I didn't even have the money back then to buy anything, but I just wanted to get into it. Anyway, eventually I saved up enough cash, and like it kind of self-perpetuated because that kind of led me to be a massive tight ass in my day to day, right? Like just seeing and feeling and going and see, all these open homes. And I was just like, okay, cool. I need to buy the first house. I need to save money. So everything I made, and I was lucky enough to be still living at home at the time. So I saved up enough deposit, and then I bought my first property. And the first property was the opposite to everything that I've read, right? Because at the time, the first home buyer scheme, the very first one just kicked in. $16,000 you got, and it was free stamp duty, and you had to live in it for 6 months. And back then, the budget or the max price was $600,000. Yeah. So me, along with all the other, hundreds of thousands of first home buyers lined up outside all these $550,000 or $500,000 properties. and I ended up with my first property there and then. But maybe to preface that, I did recruitment. I sucked at it. I got fired, and then I ended up selling conferencing. Right, so back then and even now, there are a lot of companies that organize conferences for governments and for different industries. And my job was to sell tickets. So I would cold call business. Actually, I was in charge of government conferences. So I was calling like policy makers and stuff like that in Canberra and all around Australia to get them to come to this conference. And back then, I met a very important person in my life who basically taught me how to sell, right? Taught me to come out of my shell and really just sell properly and to engage properly and to do all that kind of stuff. And interestingly, we're working together now again at Housefinder. So it's kind of come full circle. And, you know, learning how to sell is equivalent to learning how to negotiate a property. Yeah. So being able to engage with a cold calling prospect versus getting to engage a real estate agent at a level that's beyond strictly business probably laid the foundation of how I managed to consistently negotiate or find bargain deals, off-market bargain deals. Because the truth is, all agents have off-markets. You know, they know who the distressed sellers are. They know who has to sell. They know what property is in what situation. But whether they tell you or not depends on whether they trust you, because they still have to have this agenda that they're doing the best thing for the vendor, which is true, right? But at the same time, a lot of agents are focused on trying to make their 2 or 3% commission. And if there's a situation or a particular house that might be a little bit difficult, maybe it's tenanted and it's hard to get access or it's not that presentable, if you have that trust with them, they'll be like, okay, cool, I do have this property. It's off market. If you can get me an offer of X amount and the terms are, nice and easy, we don't have to do long settlements or anything like that, then we can probably get the deal done. Cool. So that kind of learning how to sell is really important. Yeah. And you don't have to be like a superstar salesperson, but just as simple as being able to engage someone like off the bat, and not just have that standard dialogue of, hi, Mr. Agent, I'm just,
The generalized cliche stuff, it does my head in.
yeah. what's the price guide?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
when's
Same,
the
same old,
open
same old.
home? And generally speaking, I mean, agents, they're kind of similar to you in the sense that they just want to make money. They just want to get the deal done. And a lot of them are just kind of like, beyond the suits and the AMGs and fancy watches and stuff. They're just a bro, they're like one of the boys, you know what I mean? So really getting to them at that level was key, I think, to a lot of the stuff that I ended up doing. But anyway, I did that. I actually did very well at that job. I was earning good money, and then I was putting all of that money into these properties. So the very first house, very first unit, West Rides, I lived in it for 6 months to get the first homeowners grant, and in hindsight, huge regret. Because I could have bought a house in Western Sydney. I could have bought one of these North Gosford things. It would have killed it. And then I knew back then, after buying it, living in it for 6 months, it was a mistake because, when you live in it for 6 months, you've got 6 months worth of holding costs that you have to fork out and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't conducive to the strategy that I wanted. So then I ended up buying a house out in Western Sydney, put a granny flat on. Back then, granny flats were very like a newish kind of thing. And the 2-bedder granny flat that I put on was only 90 grand, all in. And it was great, got good yield on paper, but then I had lots of tenancy issues, a lot of random. So I had a lot of single mums back to back renting that property, and nothing against single mums, but every one of them eventually had a boyfriend or someone else living at the property. And then, like clockwork, they would have issues, and then that would cause altercations, let's say, and then that caused a lot of dramas with the front tenant and this and that. So anyway, it was a bit of a nightmare, and it eroded the cash flow that people promise with granny flats. But, just by way of Sydney going up at the time, the market going up, I ended up getting rid of it, sold it, made a lot of money out of it, and then just started pumping all that profit and more of my earnings into properties in Logan. And that's how Logan in Queensland, and that's how my property journey began. But all of it came down to quitting my job. That was the thing that I was just purely focused on, because even at the sales job that I was good at, I was fully out of my comfort zone every single day, right? Because naturally, back then, like, I was just, still like a very kind of introverted, kind of like a closed person. And to do that job properly, you have to like pretend to be not, right? So it was an uphill battle. And it was just depressing, man. Like putting on your suit every day. That thing, how you wear your button-up shirts, you don't even button them, you just kind of pull it over on because you just can't be bothered. Like, it was just like and then you catch a train, and then I'm sitting there on the train, every single person is the same. You see them year on year, right? Same platform, they're standing in the same spot, same seats. So you see them, you kind of know them, you never ever speak to them. And you're all kind of doing the same thing. And that was when I realized, like, the reason why I failed at high school, once and twice, wasn't because I was an idiot. It wasn't because I was stupid. It was just my brain has always been wired to be very goal driven. If I don't see a goal or an outcome, I'm not going to do anything. I've zero motivation to do it. And then coming out of that, kind of, and going through the different sort of sales, 9-to-5 jobs, kind of taught me that as well. That, yes, you have goals and you have aspirations in your career, but really you do your 9-to-5, you go home, you have dinner, you watch TV, you spend your weekends with your mates and this and that, and drinking and stuff. And it was very same thing, not really goal driven. So that's why every single morning, like that kind of depression or whatever you want to call it, of seeing that, being in that situation, was like, okay, more properties, and that kind of built
That drove you.
That drove me to
So
keep
the
buying
sales
more.
piece was really that's the foundation of your skill set, but the drive came from the pain of being in the 9-to-5 and the grind and the way you didn't want to be, and then the goal was property. So then what was where did you really where did House Finder come into this, and how did you go, okay, I'm going to turn this investing in property into my business? Like, how did that happen?
Well, it happened the way that it should have happened, which is not what happens a lot today, right? I kept buying properties. I ended up with 14 properties in 7 years, because back then lending was a little bit different. These Logan houses I keep talking about, no one was there. Brisbane at the time was dead, right? People actually didn't want to go to Brisbane to live, let alone invest. But I bought all these little houses in an area called Logan, and every single person, I remember going to property meetups and online property forums and things like that, and everyone was thinking, this guy's an idiot. You're never going to make money there. It's always going to be negative stigma, similar to this area. Back then, it had the same thing, right? But then I kind of looked at it and I was like, how does this make sense? You're like 20 minutes to Brizzy. You're 30 minutes from the Gold Coast. There's the M1, which is the main sort of freeway that goes through Queensland. On the left-hand side, you got houses selling for 200,000 to 300,000. On the right-hand side, you got houses selling for 500,000 to 600,000 at the time, or even more. Like, this stuff is like basically free, right? Yeah, it's got issues, but eventually that's going to change. So anyway, I just, like, back then there were a lot of mortgagees, yeah, and for some reason, I don't know if there was a rule, I still don't know to this day, but it's $230,000 seemed to be the mark, the absolute bottom that banks could sell these houses off at the time. So I literally bought 6 or I forgot how many, but like a lot of them at 230,000 on the dot. These were 3-bedroom houses, 4-bedroom houses, 600 or 700 square meter blocks. Very stock standard 20, 30-year-old, 40-year-old type properties, right? And they weren't flash. they were the opposite of flash. They were old, they'd be lived in, a lot of wear and tear, but they were rentable, clean, safe, and tidy, right? Yeah, I spent a bit of money doing some teething issues. But most importantly, they were bargains. They had instant equity. So when I bought them for $230, at the time they'd be worth $330 or $350. Like that's what the banks would value them at. And if I, did the white walls and new carpets, I probably could have sold them for $350 at the time. So every time I bought one, I pulled the equity out, and then I bought another, I pulled the equity out. Back then they had decent cash flow as well, so I just kept an eye on it, making sure I was relatively neutral. And then I got to the point where I was like, having all these houses, I ended up with, I think when I got to 7, I ended up selling one of them. And the profit I made on that started, I put them in the offset account of 1 or 2 other properties, and I immediately had 1 or 2 just fully paid off or fully offset. And that was enough to give me, I think it was like maybe $700 a week or $800 a week net income after like council rates and property management fees and insurances. And then I kept going. I ended up with, when I got to 14, I remember selling off another one, and that gave me another chunk of profit that I offset another 2 properties, I think it was. So I ended up with about 14 properties, and I had about 3 or 4 of them just fully offset.
How old are you at this point?
At this point, I was around about 29-ish.
So you're 29.
Yeah.
Okay.
29-ish. And I ended up doing it. I quit my job.
Yeah.
And it's during that time as well, I ended up leaving that sort of conferencing sales. I ended up selling transport, right? That was the worst. Like, I only did it for 3 months. I only did it for the pay slips to buy more houses, actually, right? King's Transport it was, not to beat them up, but that kind of job, like, you're like it's full of like rugby player types, because you're hitting up warehouses, and then this, like, me, baby-faced Asian guy hitting up like a warehouse. Like, I was getting no sales at all. Do you know what I mean? Like, no one was taking me seriously. Driving around my little Suzuki Swift. I was up here a few times actually, trying to pitch all these warehouses around this area. And then I ended up, I went to Luna Park. I worked at Luna Park for a while, and I was selling the conference spaces there. But yeah, all throughout that time, I was just buying these properties, and I ended up quitting my job, and then I did nothing for about 3 months, like I've always dreamt of. Right, finally, I don't have to wear the suit. I don't have to catch a train anymore. But by that point, like, my goals had changed completely, because I've been so aggressive accumulating these houses that my mind had elevated. I had a lot more confidence.
Yeah.
I had a lot more knowledge. And then back then I had a magazine, API magazine, reach out to me, and they wanted to do an article on my journey. And back then there was no like property for, like, there was one forum, but there was there wasn't all these Facebook groups and social media and all this kind of stuff. So most people got their property investing information from these, or updates from a lot of these magazines. Anyway, it was a massive feature, like 3 or 4 pages. I didn't even realize they were going to do that. This guy was like, "Yeah, we're going to come out, take a photo. We're going to do a bit of an interview, and we're going to do an article on you." Great, cool, why not, right? After I did the article, during that 3-month period, I had a lot of people just reach out randomly. "Hey man, I heard your story. I'm in a similar situation. I hate my life. I hate the train, all this kind of stuff. Can you help me? Can you give me some guidance and do the same?" And back then there was I could probably count on both hands how many buyers agents there were, right? There were a couple of big players, and then there were a bunch of ones that were emerging, that were starting up, and that was it, right? So it wasn't an industry at all, really.
Can I ask a quick favor, mate? Just before we go into the buyer's agent, like what set up the buyer's agency, I just want to make sure for the viewers and the listeners, because there's a couple of questions that got percolating in my mind. Just before you hit 30, you've come out of school, you've done it twice, you felt the pain, you felt the depression, you hated the jobs, you hated everything, everything, including Wee. something has really shifted your energy that takes so much energy to then move your mentality to go all in on property. Like Lisa said, you went all in on sales, okay, and I resonate with that. I was at Hornsby Surf Diving Ski selling clothes at the same age. Yep, 100%. All right, so I see you going to say, I was getting the kebab on the corner, yeah, and the fish and chip shop. But you're there, but you haven't shifted. You haven't energetically shifted fully into property yet. You're sitting there going, I don't like this. I don't like the 9 to 5. There's got to be something better. I'm goal orientated. But something in you had to really happen to shift, like a thought, a pattern, a trigger, a trauma, something to go, I'm going all in on this thing, like in terms of property mentors, researching, understanding, going to the Central Coast 10 times, even to look at properties that I can't afford. What was that thing? Because that took you on that trajectory to be able to buy property, buy more property, like get to that big portfolio before you got to 30. I just want to make sure nothing's missed on that point.
It was the clarity of finding and buying the right deal, the excitement of it, that you've just by being able to see a property and immediately know you can make more than your entire annual salary if you just went, sign a piece of paper and pay the deposit, right? So I thought to myself, I could slog it off for an entire year, miserable, or I could literally just buy 2 of these, which would take me, I don't know, a couple of weeks, and make that much money, right? And then that reinforced further the clarity of how I was going to get to my goal, because it was just like, buy one, pull equity, buy another, pull equity, buy another, pull equity, and you could like, the end was clear, very clear. And then that just kept me driving to do all these shitty jobs, to do the transport, to keep failing. Like, my job was a property investor. Part of that job is to work 9 to 5 and get pay slips. I didn't even care about the salary. I was making so much more money just by getting the right deal. Do you know what I mean? So then, yeah, and then you just like self-perpetuated, and then, look, it wasn't all rosy. Like, these houses, like there was for most people now that I can see, because obviously we interact with a lot of investors, they tend to get tripped up on the stuff that used to trip me up, which was like the maintenance and the tenancy issues, and again, all the noise around you. Logan's never going to grow. You're going the wrong strategy. Why don't you buy something in the North Shore or something in the city instead? But all the people that were giving advice wasn't where I wanted to be, right? So I was thinking, why would I listen to this guy? You know what I mean? Like, if I want to listen to anyone do anything, I'd make sure that they're pros at it. I want to make sure that, if I want to learn how to race cars, I'd, listen to the guy that's racing cars. And yeah, and then I just kept, that was the kind of the consistent motivation that just kept elevating and kept me going.
I have to ask a burning question,
Yeah.
but I'm going to jump really far ahead, but we're going to come back, right?
Back to the 30s.
Yeah, we need to go back to how house finder come about. But I'm thinking about what listeners would be thinking right now listening to this, and they're going, okay, that was all good back then.
Yeah.
But what about now? Because obviously there's a lot of rhetoric in the media and things like that. The house prices are skyrocketing. It's hard to invest. It's hard to do this. It's hard to do that. It was easier back then, blah, blah, blah. But the things and the fundamental parts of what you just talked about and the philosophies that you had back then, from what I understand, still apply today to what you do on a larger scale. Is that correct, or is there anything that's really different from back then to what you do now?
There's a lot of differences, but the differences don't matter. Yeah, the fundamentals are the same. Like, I keep banging on about only big cities. Don't do regionals. Only where population or migration needs to live in, not chooses to live in. Right. Up and coming areas before they become nice. Yeah, that's actually the biggest hurdle. Like,
Which is the example you gave before. It's the example you gave before. The 500s on this side of the road, the 600s on this side of the road, and then there was the 250s that went to 350. It's the same principle.
Exactly. But you can't see that before it happens. What you can see is the stuff that changes materially on the ground. So again, look, using that example, you see the massive price difference. You kind of analyze, is it really that much worse? So you go through, have a look, and then after you spend enough time there, you start to see, wait, hold on. Last year, this street was disgusting. Now the lawns are all nice and manicured, and the old VL Commodores out the front that are rusting are no longer there.
They're in Woolwich.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
You go to the local shops, you see the shops change. The trendy cafes and all that kind of stuff popping up, and you look at the people, and like, it's not about being judgmental, but it's you kind of just see improvement, right, overall. And then you start to realize something's happening here, right? None of this will ever show up on data. None of this will ever show up on some ABS statistic about median incomes and crime rates or whatever, right? All that is 4 to 8 years lagged. Usually comes out in census, right? So, and then catching that and going, you know what, there's something here. I'm going to commit to the area. But the commitment is so easy, in my opinion, because you're committing at such a low price point, and the cash flow typically for these areas that haven't gentrified are so high that
The risk is so low.
the risk is so low. That's one element. The other element is if you're getting genuine bargains. I've always thought of this, like if I had to sell it, let's say it settles, right? If I had to sell it, I lost my job, really in a shit situation. I could sell it and not lose money. Let's not even talk about making, equity or making growth. I could sell it and just, pay the stamp duty, pay the buying costs, selling costs, legal costs, and then walk away back to where I started. So really I had nothing to lose, but a property that has potential to gain. So anyway, in answering to your question, none of that changes. What has changed is the way we borrow, the way we structure our loans. What has changed are the locations, and the asset types are now changing. Back then, it was purely houses on land. That's what everyone wants, right? Whether you're an investor or a home buyer or owner-occupier, whatever. But when that stuff gets too pricey, people compromise. They go down to townhouses and villas, and then they compromise again if that stuff gets too expensive, down to units and so on. So over the years, as pretty much every single city now has grown, owner-occupiers and average income earners and new migrants coming to Australia, they can't afford the quarter-acre block or the nice house or even the not-so-nice house anymore. And that's always the stuff that, as investors, you want to remain exposed to, because that's the ongoing demand that's going to drive growth, but also keep the growth or the prices at that level, and not have it do this, the sort of up and down, based on interest rates, based on inflation, based on whether Donald Trump puts tariffs on some regional area that does nothing but farms corn, and then if we can't export that corn. This happened during COVID. I remember sitting at one of the awards. We went to one of the RB awards, sitting at a table next to a prominent real estate agent in Tamworth, and Tamworth's known for farming oranges. Apparently, I didn't know this. And they're like, "Oh, how's things?" "Oh man, it's really tough out there because Donald Trump put these tariffs on exports, so we can't actually send our oranges anywhere. And there's literally piles of oranges in Tamworth that was just rotting, going to waste." Something like that. Like, imagine if you were living there and you were employed in that industry. Suddenly, you're out of your job, whether you're renting or whether you're owning. You got to move, and whether they move to back to Sydney, or back to a big city where they can get some stability, because there's, always, just by nature of a big city, lots of industry, lots of offices or whatever. You can get. There's work opportunities. So anyway.
So you found property was the sure thing. Property was the sure thing done right, as opposed to businesses.
And then I thought to myself, man, if I want to retire, do I really, and I'm living off this passive income, do I really want to be exposed to that risk? right? Because if I'm retired and I'm relying on a bunch of properties to pay my bills, like I don't want 6 months worth of vacancy on any property. I can't have it. Do you know what I mean? So again, the bread and butter stuff, the affordable housing stuff in major big cities, like unless pending some major global disaster, like that stuff will always be in demand. So that's why I kind of always stick to that. But up and coming areas that are a little bit, they don't really tick the emotional boxes, at least yet, and just committing to it, but committing to it sensibly, based on numbers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so then back to then house finder, because what you kind of promise, from what I can tell, up to 20% below market price is what you guys try to find, right? So I'm assuming that promise or that way of operating came from what you'd seen and done yourself personally, going, this is possible, we can do this, but we can do this for other people. Is that how it came about, or?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't want to use the word promise. We don't promise anything. We don't guarantee anything. Anyone who does is a massive red flag, right? Like, if they get it right, you'll never hear the end of it. If they don't get it right, you'll never hear from them again. Do you know what I mean? So, but we go by track record. And the 20%, and sometimes it might be 15 or 10%. Like it depends. There's so many variables. Like if I sent you a house and it was an absolute rundown dump, and it was 20% below market value, you may still not buy it, right? Whereas if I sent you a house that was a nice 4-bed, 2-bath, normal house, and it was only 10 or 15% below, you probably see that as a better deal. So sometimes it's not strictly about how much of a bargain it is, depending on what kind of investor you are. But it came about, number one, because I had a lot of people reach out to me, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna do this for fun, because at that point I was addicted to finding deals. Yeah, just seeing a property and go, I can make 100 grand out of that immediately, or 200 grand out of that immediately, and I couldn't borrow anymore. Like even back then, how relaxed it was at 14 properties with the amount of debt I had. I think it was like 4 to 5 million at the time. No banks would look at me. So I had all these deals that I was still seeing, and I couldn't filter them to anybody. So on the other hand, all these people coming out to me, reaching out, going, "Hey, can you help me?" I go, "Cool, let's just marry the two." And then it started, just in the West Ride unit in the bedroom. Back then there was no DocuSign, so I had this little printer. I printed out the contracts and and this and that. It was a little setup. And then, just organically, I think, and this comes back to what's not happening in the industry at the moment, right? Everyone's on, and look, I'm on socials and all that kind of stuff now. I do a little bit of marketing and I'm ramping it up as well, but because it's necessary. But all the business I had, probably for about 5 to 6 years from that point onwards, was referrals or repeats. And the only reason it was growing and sustaining like that is because every single purchase that we bought made money, right? And if I buy a property for a person and they pay me my fee, and the money I make them immediately is 5 times that fee, they're going to be like, cool, I pay Simon $2, I get 10 back. Yeah? Let's do it again and again and again. Oh, I spoke to my colleague. I spoke to my family. They want in as well. So it kind of just kept growing like that, and to where it is today. So kind of it was very organic. It was very sort of to the point where I was, and to some degree still am, knocking back, or maybe not milking everything out of it. Do you know what I mean? Like it's it's been quite overwhelming, somewhat frustrating as well, but I think that's always the byproduct of doing the right thing. Yeah, just ensuring we're not just sort of churning and burning through clients and looking
have to know when
purely
to
at
say no.
revenues and bottom lines and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I think what's given you so much success with clientele is that you've gone first. So you got the reps and the results for yourself first, you embodied it, and then you replicated it. They got results, and then it was the self-fulfilling prophecy between the two components. What I would love to do for the next couple of minutes is there were principles, right? There were key core principles, philosophies, right? between 22 and 30
Yeah.
that got you to 14. Okay.
Yeah.
Give or take 14 properties.
Yeah.
Then from 30, setting up your buyer's agency, house finder, till now, those principles would have increased utilization, if you like. They would have magnified. They would have exponentially grown. I want you to talk about the key principles, the key philosophies in your mind, the key non-negotiables that have allowed the journey to start and then have allowed it to exponentially grow.
Key principles, like what are you talking like from a business perspective?
How you
or
buy
from
and find the best properties, and how you make sure that there's always a return on investment, because we're talking to people that really need to do this stuff themselves or utilize people like you who can do it with them. So I think like one of those things was there needs to be a means to an end sometimes. You've got to work, you've got to have profit, income, right? As an example, like we talk about that, we build businesses, etc. We say we need profit so you can invest. That's one of the principles. Other ones.
Yeah, because you've done it, right? So our model in his podcast, ultimately, which we spoke about, was like it's profits in the business, it's leverage then off the back of the income, which you needed to do circa 30 to keep your journey alive. And then that creates more property and equity. And then that sort of just circles around itself. So when I say principles or philosophies, like non-negotiable things, the macros, if you like, you know how you got food and you talk about the macros?
Yeah.
What are your macros of what has created you the wealth in property that are your like, it's your principles of your story. So mine are, for example, like Lisa said, keep cranking the profits in a business, like, and create a more valuable business simultaneously. Leverage the position, which you would have heard me talk about so many times in client scenarios when we're talking. Leverage their position, which so many brokers can limit. Okay, but the good ones like Hung that we use don't. Okay, the strategic ones, strategic brokers, giving you a plug, and then off that leverage position, maximize your property, but the best property that you purchase for clients. And then that thing just, it's atomic combustion, if you like. So they're my principles.
The absolute biggest macro or principle that we stand by from day dot to now is we cannot buy anything that's not a bargain deal, a good deal, right? It's like, in my mind now, it's unfathomable to pay retail, let alone above market, which is what most people do, right? Because they fall in love with the house and they get carried away at auction because of the FOMO, right? So, and it's not really their money either. They're getting 80% of it usually from the bank. So they don't really think about how much is this actually worth, right? It's really important. And with that said, you have to be malleable to some degree, because value in property is not like a defined number, right? It's not $562,482, right? The best way to determine value is looking at as similar comparables as possible that have sold recently. Don't make it hard for yourself and look at stuff that sold a year ago. Don't make it hard for yourself by nitpicking, oh, this has a slightly nicer kitchen marble or whatever, and this isn't a comparable or anything like that. But near enough is close enough, right? So determining value, getting a bargain, absolute essential, right? Today, capital cities, non-negotiable. A lot of people in the past 6 years made tons of money buying almost everything within the confines of Australia. And that bred a lot of property experts dressing up a crappy area into the next big thing. And a lot of unsuspecting mums and dads followed suit. And they made tons of money, don't get me wrong. All of these regional towns, they went up a lot. But similar to 2009-ish, during the mining boom, when that kind of went bang, collapsed, all these regional pockets just nosedived, right? So the key theme there, or macro, is sustainability. We all want growth. We all want to make money, but we need that growth to stay at that level. And that only happens in big cities.
And not be subject to these environmental factors that could impact them.
Environmental,
Yeah.
political, economical, bloody, I don't know, anything, right? Because, like I said before, people moving to major capital cities are non-negotiable. It's not a choice. it's a need.
Yeah, you won't see a mass exodus of a city, a capital city. Yes.
Honestly, those are the two main things. There are like a bunch of smaller ones, like making sure it's got decent cash flow, making sure that they're not like fully dilapidated. Like I'm not a big fan of renos when you're building your portfolio to get to your first goal, which is passive income for most people. Focus all your energy, all your capital into buying more houses. You're always going to make more money owning more houses. Every single person that's listening to this, the only thing they regret in the past 6 to 10 to 15 years is they don't own more properties, right? Like you can buy a house and spend 18 months and $100,000 or $50,000 even to renovate a house, and you'll feel proud and you'll warm fluffy feeling at night, this and that. But it's like if you just spend that time and money to buying another property, like you would have just made so much more money. And it's not about being a slumlord, right? You want to maintain it, you want to make it clean, safe and tidy, but that's it.
But you can find homes already like that.
Yeah.
So would you go, so hypothetically, I'm a listener, I've got, say, 500K sitting in equity. Maybe I don't even know yet, but they should know, so check that out. But where would be your first point of call? Would it be a house? Would it be a townhouse? Would it be a unit?
Be agnostic, right? Because currently there are multiple areas that makes a lot of sense to buy in. Perth, Adelaide, parts of Tasmania, Hobart. We're seeing signs of life there in terms of migration. It's no longer a place where you go and, for a weekend away and this and that. Even back in Sydney, there's a particular type of asset that I've been quite vocal about in other podcasts. And depending on the city and depending on what cycle it's at, what part of the growth cycle it's at, what kind of price points it's at, sometimes a house may make sense. Sometimes a townhouse or villa may make sense. Sometimes even a unit might make sense. And I get asked this question by every single client. What would you choose? I won't care. What's a good deal? If I see a unit in this city that makes a lot of sense and it's a bargain, I'll buy it. If I see a house in this particular city that makes a lot of sense, I'll buy that. We're here to make money, right? Not to fall in love with, and then the other issue we have a lot is every single day, and by the way, it's like we're all human, right? It's not, you can't be like a robot and just assess it. There is a sleep at night factor involved, but a lot of people not argue with us, but they challenge us on the land size of a particular house that we send out, or maybe the age of the property, or maybe the fact that the suburb doesn't have a train station, or, all these factors, which can be important. But again, always look back historically. Would you not have bought in a Sydney suburb 10 or 15 years ago that didn't have a train station, right? Because they all went up. Would you not have bought a house that was on 300 square meter block? If that suburb was full of 300 square meter block houses, because that's the character of the suburb, that still tripled in value.
And that leads me to a key point with what I see you do around value extraction. Is some of it's like present value extraction, which is leveraging your skill set, negotiation, getting the buy price down, finding buy price that based on comparable data is lower, finding that value there. But something that I think you were doing so well in your 20s and you've magnified now is being able to simply look at the future and the sustainability, like you said, and the future value of an area. Just go back to the example we used earlier, which was up north and had the two 500K properties on each side and you got the 350s. You're able to assess the terrain for future value, not get hung up on the train station that's not there, but go, I'm going to get value now on the negotiation, the buy price. I'm going to preempt future valuation based on macros, and then I'm going to lock in a value or an equity position. What are some of the macro questions? What are some of the macro things you're looking at? Because you're right, the train station might not be there right now, okay? But you're not getting hung up on the train station or the land size. You're looking at what's the future value that's coming.
It's a hard question, honestly, because I talked a little bit before about buying to these areas before you see those signs of life.
Yes.
Right? But some of the macros, I guess you can overall, is it in proximity to the city? And by the way, that changes with each city. Like
because
in
they
S-
expand.
well, just the nuances of each city is different. Like in Sydney, if you're 60 kilometers away from the city, you're basically in nowhere, no man's land. 50 to 60 k's. But in Perth, you could be 100 kilometers away and still be considered in Perth, because in Perth, culturally, people who live and choose to live in Perth don't want to be near the CBD. They need access to it to get to the jobs and all that kind of stuff. But they're actually, because geographically, it's up and down the coast. There's really amazing beaches, right? So people who live in Perth, they want the beach lifestyle. They want the sort of holiday feel. They don't want traffic. They want fresh air, less stress. And then you look at the infrastructure there, like it's very well connected. So you could be 100 kilometers away, and to get to the city may take you less than an hour. Do you know what I mean? So like there's all these little things that you have to look at, but the key thing is how close it is to the city, how undervalued it is, like an asset type or a property type compared to something else that's geographically close. So similar situation as, if you have suburb A, and a house there might be 700 grand, 800 grand, but suburb B, you can buy houses there for 600 or 500 grand. And these suburbs are geographically very close to each other. That's another tell, you know. Um,
Are you considering yield? Like,
yes, I was about to say
yeah.
yield. So typically another characteristic of an area that's undervalued, so to speak, is the yield difference. And there's no set number. It's not like, oh, we're chasing 6%. That determines a good. But you compare it to other parts. So in Sydney, like if you buy in a nice or blue chip area, you may only get 2% yield, or 3%. But then if you go to another area in Sydney, and if that's giving you 5% or 6%, you can, like usually what happens when that area gentrifies and it grows, the yield will become like 3% or 4% first, and then 3% and 2%. So that's another thing to look at. Yeah, like sometimes, like look, I don't want to say it like there's some kind of Jedi mind trick thing that we do, but sometimes it's just instincts.
Yeah.
You drive.
Balance all these things.
Well,
don't you?
you drive around and you're on the ground and you look at the areas, and once you familiarize yourself and you're driving around and you're going, there is no reason why this area shouldn't be or cannot be nicer, or more expensive. Like in Perth, we've been buying in Perth for 6 years now. Thousands of deals, but there's a pocket at the very far north and also the very far south. Very far north, you've got suburbs like Yanchep, Eglinton, Alkimos. Very far south, you've got areas like Horsehead, right? You go to these areas physically, beautiful, right near the beaches, brand new houses building. And a lot of people are like, oh, new housing, greenfield estates and this and that. It's not, there's going to be too much supply coming on. But again, that doesn't affect anything. If anything, that draws more of these owner-occupiers and young families who want that Pleasantville feel to it, rather than buying in some old suburb that used to be full of drug addicts, right? And that's what happened in Sydney in the northwest. Right, and they're still building more land out in Box Hill and so on, but it's all tripled and quadrupled because the demographics were just super high income, not super high income, but your average to high income people started filtering in, and that's what causes the gentrification. And you just go there and go, why is this not more than it is? Like it's near the beach, 40 minutes, 50 minutes to the city. When I say near the beach, like you can walk there, right? And yeah, in the past 6 years, these areas have doubled, in some cases close to tripling in value. And back then, it was such a hard slog to convince the clients that came through. Another one of the macros that I wanted to talk about that just sprung to mind is never waver from your fundamentals, which is what we're seeing a lot of at the moment. Government announces, budget changes, capital gains, negative gearing. Like yesterday, let's say they really believed in the regional areas that they were buying in. Suddenly they're doing house and land. Suddenly they're doing new builds, and they're trying to build some marketing bullshit around it to push that so that they can keep the business going. That's selling out. That means you're just trying to make a dollar from all these unsuspecting mums and dads. You're trying to sell them this dream. But for us, it's not that at all. Like ever since I started this, every single area we've bought in has been a massive uphill battle because we were so early and there was no signs of life. All the investors were like, why would we buy here? It makes no sense. Right. And then afterwards they're like, man, that was great. Thank you so much, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, you kind of have to look at these signs and just commit. I think that's
such
the key thing.
perfect point there. And that goes for businesses that you need to work with and trust, but it also goes for properties and your philosophies around properties is that every one of them has to have a sustainable message and philosophies that underpin what they do. Otherwise, these opportunities that do pop up, wherever they are, whoever they are, whether they're in property or they're in business, just trying to make a buck because they've got a new offer or a new something, they're usually the ones that do suffer under the changes, like the budget or whatever it is that might come out and change. Whereas we need to stay true to what we believe and what we know is true and what works.
I mean, you just have to have conviction in your offering, right? Like,
And it comes from somewhere with substance that's real. Like what you've done, it's real. You've done it.
yeah, like Macca's wouldn't start selling
No,
KFC
that's right.
tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Like it'll ruin.
They're
Will
trying
they?
new things all the time.
I found popcorn chicken in the fries.
Their menus just keep growing.
Macca's was this. I didn't
Oh
hear
yeah, man. No, fundamentals is key. That's why we wanted to spend so much this podcast on the why and your mind and not the what, because so many people get hung up on budgets and gearing and all that fun stuff, which is not your macros. It's not your fundamentals. It's not
and
negotiable.
it'll change again. That's what people don't realize. They're making all these major life decisions, and in 2 years' time, if Liberal comes in or if One Nation comes in, they've already said pretty adamantly that they're going to either reverse it completely or change it. Like,
And this has happened in the history of time. We've seen
100%.
it all happen
85
already.
to 87, they reversed it. So, and it's not even through legislation still. So, yeah, it just boggles my mind how people are so reactive to this stuff. I mean, we're not dealing with shares or crypto. It doesn't react like that.
The same with who they talk to, right? I spoke to so-and-so at the barbecue and we've talked about the barbecues and the problems with the people who talk about things in a completely uninformed, uneducated way that then turn their opinion into something else. We're like, no, talk to the people who've done it. Talk to the experts, utilize them and go forth.
Yeah.
Now I've got a no barbecue policy in the business. No, they can't. They come over, and I've heard everyone post budget you could imagine from highly intelligent people, like really intelligent people. Should we sell all our property? Should we just get into shares?
We don't do property now, do
Why
we?
is there
No.
tax on our house? And I'm just like I love you all. I'm just going to be black and white. Focus on the 80%.
I'll be in the car. I'll be at Macca's. I'm going to Macca's.
Yeah, get me some KFC while you're
Yeah.
there. Mate, thank you so much for your time.
No worries, man.
You're the gold. The gold.
The goat. You're the goat with the gold.
You're the golden
The
goat.
golden goat.
You're the golden goat of property in Australia. We love you. We work with you. You're incredible.
Congratulations again on winning that award. That was huge. You took out some big names.
Yeah,
so-
well, it was actually quite humbling. A lot of those guys were the early players. Actually, not a lot of them. At least one of them was one of the early players that I really looked up to before I started this whole house finder thing. And I don't want to downplay their efforts or anything like that as well. And it's good to get some recognition, but yeah, it was nice. Put it that way. Yeah. Thank you, man. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool.
Thanks, buddy.
Baby, tell me the